So I'm Jim Watson. I'm Director of the UK Energy Research Centre and Professor of Energy Policy at UCL.
Could you give us a brief insight into your role? What do you get up to?
So my main role is to lead the UK Energy Research Centre. That's the largest research centre funded by the UK Research Councils. So a lot of my work involves research strategy, coordinating and developing a research programming and helping to make sure it's implemented with a lot of colleagues around the country working in the research programme, including a set of co-directors for UKERC. There's a lot of time spent engaging with our major stakeholders, whether they be in government, whether they be in parliament, in major companies, smaller companies and in civil society. A fair bit of work in fundraising, and then quite a bit of work sort of involved in, basically the day-to-day running of UKERC, working with the team that we have in our headquarters, but also our researchers around the UK.
Have you always wanted to work in the energy sector?
Not always, but it started quite early. So my route into doing what I'm doing now is a little bit unusual. So I started out as an engineer, did an engineering degree. My original industrial background is in the car industry, so I worked as an apprentice in the car industry, which I could have continued, but at the time I just felt it wasn't exciting enough in the late 1980s, early 1990s. I then, through my degree, did some work on the wind technology, so I designed and built a wind turbine during my degree, and that got me interested in energy. But what really shifted me into the kind of work I've done in most of my career was actually my PhD, where I could look at not just developing a technology, but actually understanding the economic and policy environment that shapes technological change. So how does government policy, how do industries and firms and consumers actually contribute to how technologies develop? And particularly, how does energy policy work and how does that shape the energy system? So that really converted me from being an engineer to a social scientist. And then since then, I've been working on energy policy, energy innovation policy, and working on those questions, which was always interdisciplinary. It was always at the boundary of disciplines, and that really prepared me quite well for the kind of role I do at the UK Energy Research Centre, where I'm working with people from all sorts of disciplines, engineers, natural scientists and social scientists.
What's the best thing about working in this sector, or do you have any highlights of your career?
I think it's a very, very exciting sector to work in. In a way, when I first started out working in the sector in the early 1990s, it was really, really boring. All we were, certainly in a PhD with a research group working on energy policy and markets, a lot of the discussion was about the structure of the industry, how it had been privatized, whether it should liberalize more or not. The whole agenda about climate and sustainability just was very, very nascent. It was only just starting. Whereas now there's how do we meet our net zero challenge across the economy. So there's a huge amount of innovation to do, technologies needed, policies needed, companies need strategies. And then there's the whole change with digitization and new technology from other sectors, which is coming across and starting to revolutionize the energy industry. So it means the industry is bigger, the research community is bigger, and it's just much more diverse and exciting than I ever imagined it would be when I started out in 1993.
What have been the main challenges to working in the energy sector, or any obstacles you've personally encountered?
I think the big challenges really have been, certainly early on, one big challenge was funding. There wasn't a lot of research funding for doing research. A lot of my research was funded not by research funders of the traditional kind early on. I did work funded by government directly. I did work funded by companies. So that was a challenge. I think another challenge, which I was quite lucky to have some help overcome, was that interdisciplinarity. So a key challenge for many early career researchers I know is that you are trained in a particular disciplinary department, but actually the challenges of energy cut across those disciplines. They're often not just purely technical or not just purely economic or not just purely environmental, and often you need teams of people working across those boundaries. So that's a challenge. And then, of course, there's the challenges about, well, are we going to be able to develop and deploy all the solutions, the technologies, put in place all the policies that we need to get to our targets in a timely way? So that's a big challenge. And I think the research community has a very big role to play across all of those challenges.
What advice would you give to someone considering a career in the energy sector?
Certainly my advice would be to go for it. There's a huge amount of opportunities, whether you're interested in an academic career, where there's a lot of opportunities to do research. It's not that all the problems have been solved, far from it. There's a lot of research to be done, whether it be on the technical side or the economic side or of an interdisciplinary nature about how we meet our targets. There's huge opportunities in the private sector and in companies and in the third sector, because there's lots of implementation to be done, We've got a huge amount of work to do in transport, in industry, in power, to actually implement the technologies and the solutions, as well as the changes to the way we socially organise ourselves. So there's huge opportunities there. So I would say just, go for it and see where your interests lie. Are you really interested in research and providing the evidence, or would you prefer to be a doer and actually implement things? And that may more lend itself to either a private sector career or a public policy career where you're developing new policies or something like that. But it's a very exciting time, and there's a lot of opportunities out there.
What do you see as the biggest challenges of the UK reaching a net zero target by 2050?
I think the main challenge is one of marrying the kind of optimism of the target we now have and the ambition of it with where we are now, and the fact that although we've made a lot of progress in some sectors like power, there's a huge way to go in transport, in industry, in heating, in land use, etc. And a lot of that depends to some extent on the technologies being available at the right time, people adopting them, industry investing in the right things. But actually it also depends on the policy frameworks being in place to push those processes along at the speed we need to get to that target. So there's a combination of linked challenges, but the really big one is a level of government ambition, not just to sign up to a target, but to actually get on with the incentives and those steps that are needed to get us on that pathway over the next 5 years, and not wait till 2049 and then realise that we're not going to meet the target.
What is the most interesting single project, maybe hard to choose, that you've been involved in?
I mean, I'd probably be bound to say the UK Energy Research Centre, because that's what I lead right now, partly due to its diversity, its breadth, the opportunities you get to interact with senior stakeholders and to hopefully have an impact on the debate on evidence. But I mean, speaking personally, the first grant I had for ESRC, which is going back, well over 10 years now, which was looking ahead of its time at the idea of microgeneration, as we then called it, in the home, generating your own power. At the time, everybody was obsessed with the idea of having a mini combined heat and power station in your house instead of your gas boiler, and micro wind turbines, which the then Prime Minister famously stuck on his house. As it turned out, what actually happened was that those technologies didn't really work out, and the one that really did work out was solar, which we did work on as well. The reason that project was quite exciting was that I got to lead a project which had a small multidisciplinary team, engineers and social scientists. We did some really good analysis. I felt that we did quite well at bringing it together, but also we had a really good level of interaction with the industry and with government. And so it was a real opportunity to do some good research, develop some evidence, but actually put that evidence to good use. And looking back, it was quite a good stepping stone for a lot of other things that I ended up doing in the next 5 to 10 years that followed.
What qualities do you look for in graduates entering the energy sector if you were looking to hire one?
I mean, I mostly get involved in hiring researchers or PhD students, but the qualities, one quality that's really important is enthusiasm and excitement about the subject, but linked to some knowledge, because it can be quite bewildering. But I think the more knowledgeable you are about some of the trends and what the big opportunities are in the area you're interested in applying for, the better, because you then come in and you're well briefed and you really understand whether it's a research organisation where you can understand where the research challenges are, or whether it's a company you can understand where the innovation and market challenges are. So that's one thing. I think another thing which is really important, even if you're a specialist, so you might be an economist or you might be an engineer or a physicist, is although you might be a specialist in your chosen field, that real appreciation of how that fits into the bigger picture. So can you fit your specialist knowledge into the bigger questions that either government or researchers or companies are going to be asking? So can you relate that deep knowledge and communicate it to a broader audience and really feel you can understand how you fit into that bigger picture, and be flexible about how you can apply that knowledge and those skills in practice in whatever position you're applying for.